Welcome to this talk where we will be discussing the impact of the bulletin board on the e-voting security. My name is Lucca Hirschi and this is a joint work with Lara, Schmid and Basin. So let's first have a look at a very simple and simplified example of an e-voting protocol. So here you have voters that are going to choose their votes and they're going to compute ballots out of those votes. So possibly they use randomized encryption for that. Those ballots are going to be sent to a voting server and directly published on a bulletin board. And voters have to check that their ballots are indeed on the bulletin board to make sure they will be counted by the tally. And speaking of the tally, at the end of the election, the tally is retrieving all the ballots on the bulletin board and it just computes the election result out of them. So it will open those ballots, maybe decrypting them, but to make sure this is done correctly and made in a verifiable way, it also computes a zero-knowledge proof to prove that this computation is correct, so that you do not have to trust this tally for doing this computation correctly. And auditors will access the bulletin board and check that those proofs are indeed correct and that you can actually trust the election result. So what are the key security goals you expect from e-voting? First, you want vote privacy. This is very important. You want to make sure that as a voter, your vote is not disclosed to anyone. And here the threat model is typically to trust 1 out of n tally servers. This is assuming a distributed tally, which is very common. But all other tally servers, the voting server and the bulletin board can all be malicious. More interestingly for this talk, there is also verifiability that is a very important property, and that states that the election result can be trusted, that the election result is indeed the result of counting all the ballots that have been casted. And it is believed to hold provided that the zero-knowledge proofs are sound, because that's the idea of the zero-knowledge proofs. You don't have to trust the entities that have done the computations thanks to them. So it is sometimes claimed that verifiability holds even when you have a dishonest tally, voting server and bulletin board. And here we ask the question, is that really the case? What if the bulletin board and the voting server are malicious? So what is really the state of the art? First, in security proofs of verifiability in e-voting protocols, it is always assumed actually that the bulletin board is idealized, which means it is somehow a broadcast channel or shared memory, something that perfectly fulfills the idealized functionality of a bulletin board. But that is way too costly and complex to deploy and implement in practice. So what we find in practice in actual designs, reference implementation and deployments is actually that the voting server and the bulletin board are both run by one single centralized server, which make it a single point of trust. So as you can see, there is quite a mismatch here between the proofs and what's done in practice. So what are contributions here now? First, we asked ourselves the question, what really is the security impact of a malicious bulletin board in practice? And we found out that there are actually practical attacks based on malicious bulletin board against Helios, Belenios, and Civitas, which are state-of-the-art e-voting protocols. And those attacks are violating claims made, security claims of these e-voting protocols. Second, we wanted to fix this. We wanted to find a bulletin board requirement that is kind of in the middle. So something that is still probably sufficient for verifiability, strong enough for that, but not as strong as an idealized bulletin board that cannot be really implemented. So to show that our requirement is actually something practical that could be used, we have designed a quite simple protocol, a distributed protocol that could be deployed. It's a practical protocol. And we have proved with a machine check formal proof that this protocol does fulfill the bulletin board requirement we have defined. So what are those attacks? So the main attack vector is what we call the bulletin board equivocation, and I'm going to explain you the key idea of this attack vector. So here we have this first voter, here's a green voter, who is going to cast this green ballot and check that the ballot is on the bulletin board, and the bulletin board does indeed contain this green ballot. Everything's fine. The blue voter is going to cast this blue ballot, and again, now the bulletin board content is a bit larger, but it contains the blue ballot, so everything's fine. Now comes the yellow voter. And here the bulletin board is going to do some malicious things. It's going to equivocate this yellow ballot, whether it's on the bulletin board or not. It will create two words, one for the yellow voter, where the bulletin board content will contain it, and for the rest of the world, this yellow ballot does not exist. And for the rest of the world, people will think this yellow voter didn't take time to cast a ballot at all. So, first step if the yellow voter wants to access the bulletin board will send him a bulletin board content containing his ballot. Okay, so he will be happy. But for example, when tallying, when sending all the ballots to the tally, the yellow ballot is not there. Okay, and when the auditors are going to check that the end result is correct, they are going to check this in the context where there is no yellow ballot, because for the auditors, this yellow ballot does not exist. So everything is fine as well. The zero-edge proofs are correct in that context. It is consistent with this set of ballots. As you can see, the idea here is to let the bulletin board actually show this yellow voter a different content. So how can this be used in practice to actually introduce a bias for some specific vote? Here's the gray vote. So first, the attacker is going to target a set of voters who likely do not vote for this gray vote. That's a probabilistic guess. It's not 100% sure. When a target voter will cast a ballot, the yellow ballot, it will remove this ballot from the bulletin board, except when the target voter is going to request the bulletin board content. And the attacker is going to proceed honestly with all other voters and auditors. And as you can see, the tally, the end result will be counted based on based on a set of ballots from which we have removed all those yellow ballots here. So it will contain less ballots against the gray option. And if our guesses were right here, it will contain the number of target voters less ballots against the gray option. So in the paper we explain why this is actually a practical attack and why it's extremely unlikely that this attack will be detected by people. We also have other attacks, other equivocation attacks, because note that the attackers, the malicious bulletin board, can actually equivocate on other data items, not only ballots, and also towards different agents, not only voters. So we have a bunch of other attacks on Civitas, Millennials, and Helios. And for some of them, there are easy fixes. You can add some additional checks to actually detect the attacks. But for some of them, including the one I've shown you, there is no really easy fix. So those are with the red crosses. So now how do we fix this situation? How do we find a way to make those protocols more secure? So first, as I said before, verifiability definitions do assume idealized bulletin board. So we had to define a verifiability notion that accounts for malicious bulletin board. And then we have defined our new bulletin board requirements that we called final agreement, FA. And we have formally proved that it is sufficient for verifiability. That means that if you prove for a protocol that verifiability holds, assuming an idealized bulletin board, this is what you find in the literature, then if you use a bulletin board that can be malicious as soon as it fulfills our requirement, as long as it fulfills our requirement, then your protocol will also satisfy verifiability against this malicious bulletin board. We also show that it's a minimal requirement. and we provide an easily deployable bulletin board protocol with a machine check proof that it does satisfy this requirement FA. And so to summarize here, I would say that this allows to, it provides an effective means to actually weaken trust assumptions in existing and in future e-voting protocols. You go from having to assume a honest bulletin board to just not having to trust any additional entity regarding the bulletin board. And you just have to replace the insecure or trusted bulletin board made of one server by our secure bulletin board protocol. So to conclude, we have those new attacks, we have this new bulletin board requirement, and a bulletin board protocol that can be used. And as future work, we'd like to implement our attacks in the wild and user studies. We'd like to adapt our verifiability notion to the probabilistic setting, and also to explore other trade-offs, threat model versus deployment cost. So thank you, and see you at the Q&A sessions.